So today I'm doing a review on the Cinetank Mark II, and I think that's how you pronounce it, Cinetank or Cinetank, I'm not really sure, but here it is, as you can see, and some of my parts for it too. So I'm going to start by going over some of the specs of this quadcopter, or the one I built specifically. So I'm going to start with the motors. So these motors are Sunnysky 1100 kV motors, and they have been working pretty good for me. They wired up nicely. The only problem I had with these motors is that when you originally get them, they have a metal shaft that comes from here all the way down. It protrudes through the bottom, so you have to cut that off at the bottom to fit it onto here. So that's one of the problems I had, but other than that, it's been working great. All four of them have been working great. So the next thing I'm going to go over here is my ESCs, or my speed controllers. I don't know if you can see them really here, but there they are. And they are Afro 30 amp ESCs, and they are Simon K flashed, so I find them to work pretty good, but I have no experience without Simon K, so I don't know what the difference is there. I think it's just more stable and just responds better. Higher refresh rate. So next is my flight controller. And for this one, I decided to go for the Naze 32 acro board. And the reason I did that is because I was using a KK2 board on my last quadcopter, but I really wanted to try something different, and this is supposed to be a little bit better. It's still pretty cheap. I think it was around $25 or $30. And the reason I went with a Naze over something like OpenPilot is just because Flight Test has done a video on how to set it up, the initial setup, and that's actually pretty well the only reason why I did it. I'll put a link to that Flight Test video in the description so you can check it out if you're interested. So next I'm going to show you these props. These are 9-inch props. I think they're APC. They're APC multi-rotor series, 9x4.5s. And they come in left-hand and right-hand rotation, so that's pretty good. So now I'm going to go over some of the other things in here. So I use 4-cell batteries that's recommended by Flying Cinema, which is the company that makes this quadcopter, the frame. And so I use this 4000 milliamp 4-cell, but I also use a 3300 milliamp 4-cell. So with a 3300 milliamp, I get about 7 minutes of flying pretty safely, and with the 4000, I get about 9 minutes. So you could probably push it a little bit more, but I don't like to. It's just harder on the battery, and you don't want it falling out of the sky, so it's always good to just play it safe with those. So I bought this new controller when I bought the quadcopter. It's a Turnigy 9XR Pro, and for my module I'm using a FreeSky, just the telemetry module that they have there for it. Just snaps right in and worked pretty good. And I'm using a FreeSky receiver down here to pick up the signal. To transmit my video, I'm using a Fat Shark 600 milliwatt 5.8 gigahertz transmitter with a Spironet antenna there that's circularly polarized. And so that's about it. These batteries came with a different connector, but I prefer XT60, so I did some soldering here to make them XT60. I kind of like that better. And this is one of my flight cameras. This is just the Turnigy, it's like basically a fake GoPro, but it's a cheap GoPro, so if I wreck it, I won't be as upset about it. And I was using this mount down here, which is meant for cameras, but I decided to put another mount up here because when I mount my gimbal, which I'll show you in a second, I like it to be up higher so it's not hanging down below, because if you hadn't noticed, this quadcopter doesn't really have legs to stand on. It has these landing skids here on the bottom. 4 landing skids. So next I'll show you the gimbal. So this is the gimbal that I use. I had to do some different setup than what they recommend, I guess, with it. You can it's a Terret 2-axis gimbal, and I think it was around $80 or so. I got it from Hobby King, and as you can see, I did this mount here. This is set up to use a GoPro mounting system that I just epoxied onto the back of this back motor here, right along there. And so that allows me basically to, first of all, front mount this right here where my camera is. So that way it's not, because this is traditionally meant to hang below a quadcopter, which without landing gears here wouldn't work very well. So I made it so it'll front mount using basically these are GoPro mounting hardware that came with this Turnigy camera. So I just epoxied it into place, 2 pieces there to make it like a little elbow joint, so it'll sit there. And then normally this is the board that controls the gimbal, but it's supposed to be on top up here into, it's like a mounting plastic piece that it sits in, but I decided to just put it on top of this motor using a piece of 3M double-sided tape. I don't know what it's called, but yeah, so it sits there relatively flat. I try to make it a little more flat before I fly, but and then this is where you mount the GoPro or Turnigy camera sometimes, and it'll just sit in here and it tightens here at the front, and then you have your gimbal and it works pretty good. Now the Turnigy camera that I was talking about earlier, it only just fits in there. It's a pretty tight squeeze. It's a little bit different dimensions than a GoPro, I guess. It's a little bit bigger, but it just fits in. And the reason that I only have 1 screw on here, there should be one at the bottom, but I only have 1 because with that Turnigy camera, it doesn't fit properly with both screws. So there's also a video on how to set this up, or at least how to set it up in the traditional way, that I will try to link to the description of this video so you can check it out. It's a pretty easy gimbal to set up. And if you don't know, basically a gimbal is just something that keeps the camera level as you are moving. So like if you're taking a corner, the quadcopter is going to tilt, but the gimbal is going to keep the camera completely level. And that's how you see a lot of those cool videos online where it's always level. And I'll also put a link to a couple of my videos using the gimbal, so you can check it out for yourself. So now I'm going to go over a couple of the special features of this frame that make it different from, say, a QAV 400, which is admittedly about the closest thing to this. Flying Cinema put a lot of thought into this frame when they're designing it, and they made it pretty easy to go together, but also really, really strong, and that's why they call it a Cinetank, I guess. But so basically, there's this bottom dirty section. It's called a dirty section because it's allowed to vibrate, because when these motors spin, they're going to produce vibrations, and the vibrations are going to travel basically right into this dirty section. So this is vibrating a lot, but you don't want most of your electronics vibrating, because say your flight controller board isn't a big fan of vibrating a lot, so you mount it on this top clean section that doesn't vibrate. And also your camera is on the top clean section that doesn't vibrate, so that way your video turns out smooth and without all that jello looking lines through it and waves through it. So the way they accomplish the vibration dampening are these little red, I think they're called bobbins here. They're basically little rubber brackets, or I don't know what you would call them. I guess they're bobbins, and they attach to the bottom dirty section and to the top clean section, and there's 8 of them, and they're basically the only thing holding the top section, the clean section, onto the dirty section, but they're pretty strong. So here, I'll just vibrate it a little bit and you can see the bounce there the top can bounce and the bottom doesn't. So the vibrations from the motor go into the dirty section where the ESCs are, because they don't really care if it's vibrating or not. And then these take out almost all of the vibrations, and the top section stays really smooth. So another key thing here is to ensure that the top section never comes loose from the bottom section. They have these little stoppers here. It's basically a screw with a washer around the top that stops that limits how far the clean section can move on top of the dirty section, so it can never pop off of these red bobbins. So that's a cool safety feature that I don't think that the QAV 400 has. So that's kind of an advantage there. And also this battery on top helps to supply some weight to keep the vibrations down. So there needs to be some weight on the top section when you're flying to ensure that it's going to dampen the vibrations. And the camera also helps there too. Another feature that this has over the QAV 400 is these carbon fiber arms. I think they're made from carbon fiber rods that are the same diameter as 400 size helicopter tail booms. So if you ever break one, you can go to a hobby store and buy tail booms from a carbon fiber 400 series helicopter and just cut your own, or you can just order more. They're not that expensive, but and a lot of people have problems with this frame about having these cylinder arms, thinking that the motors will be off level from each other. So you see how these motors are all level. That basically can't happen because Flying Cinema put a lot of thought into it and decided to put basically holes on the top and bottom of these tubes on both sides that these plastic pieces just fit right into. So they're always going to be level, as long, like, to fit the way that it does, they have to be level. There's no other way to do it. So you shouldn't worry about that at all. It should work out perfectly. And building this frame was a bit of a challenge for me because this was only my second frame that I've built and the first one I had help with. So this was my first one by myself. And it's fairly complicated, but Flying Cinema has put out a video on how to build the Mark 1 version of this quadcopter, which is almost the same. So if you watch that video as you're going along, it's about an hour or two long video, and they go over each step. So that's how I built it, and I'll put a link to that video in the description as well, so you can check that out. There's only a few things that I don't like about this frame, and the first one is that they want you to fit this battery in the bottom here in this back section, but that kind of limits the size of battery you can use, and it also makes the battery go very far to the back, which might mess up the center of gravity. So I just mounted the battery on the top here so I can slide it back if I want it to be more tail heavy, or slide it forward if I want it to be more nose heavy. So that's kind of nice. Of course, it doesn't protect your battery in that case, but it does protect all of my electronics, because instead of putting the receiver on the top, I put it on the bottom. So now this basically can't get hit by anything. And the only other thing I didn't like about this frame is when you're putting the ESCs into the bottom dirty section here, it is very, very limited for space. That was probably the longest part of building this frame, is fitting these ESCs in, because I set all of my wires up and then I found out that they were a little bit too long to all fit in there. So I had to basically cut and resolder all of them. So that was kind of tricky and tedious, but got through that. And once you're done that, and once you fit all these arms in, that's another tricky part. But once you get those two things done, the rest is really easy. The top clean section is really easy. And once it's built, this thing is very, very strong. Like, you can just pick it up from one of these legs here, no problem. Just hold it. It's pretty good. So those are some of the things I like and don't like about this frame. So next I'm going to be talking about some of my experiences with the frame and how the frame performs itself in flight. So this frame is very stable while flying. I guess that's more due to the Naze board itself than the frame. But I find it to be very, very stable compared to my KK2 board that I was flying on a FPV 250 from Hobby King, and this is much, much more stable. But that also is due to Flying Cinema's. They basically put out PID settings for each board, or maybe not each board, but a lot of boards. So you can just go to their website and input their PID settings and not have to mess around with that. So that's what I did, and it flies pretty well perfectly using their Naze 32 settings. So that was really nice to not have to mess around with that, because I always have a little trouble setting those up. And another thing I want to talk about is how fast this thing can go. Now I was just flying a FPV 250, and I was flying it with a GoPro on top, a cased GoPro on top. So the GoPro is like almost the size of the quadcopter. So the stability was really bad, and it couldn't fly very fast because you're focusing so much on keeping it stable. But this thing can go very, very fast. I have one video where I'm flying sideways beside a truck going about 60 kilometers an hour sideways. So I haven't gone top speed or measured top speed in forward flight, but I'll show you that video in the description of the truck video going sideways. And so finally, I'm just going to talk about whether or not I would recommend this to someone who's trying to buy their first quadcopter or their second quadcopter, or whichever one it is. It doesn't really matter. For a first quadcopter, I wouldn't recommend this. If you're a beginner and you're just starting, I would always recommend starting with a very small pre-made quadcopter. The one I started with was the Nano QX, and I find that really good. It's a great way to start. It's already tuned for you, it's already built, so all you have to do is learn how to fly. And if you're starting with one of those, I would only learn how to fly in acro mode, because if you have a computer helping you when you're learning to fly, it's going to take you that much longer to learn. And with a small quadcopter like the Nano QX, you're never going to break it. I never broke mine, and I've ran at full speed into walls and everything, so they're pretty much bulletproof, those things. So I wouldn't recommend this as a first quadcopter, but if you know how to fly them already, if you confidently know how to fly them already in acro mode without the computer helping you, I would recommend this, because it's pretty straightforward to build, especially if you use the video that they give you, and it's also pretty straightforward to set up using other videos online, like flight test video, how to set up the Naze 32, and that kind of thing. So once you have those videos, it's pretty simple to set up. It just takes a long time. Like, I would set aside some serious time to build this thing. It took me about a week building, maybe an hour or two every day. So it probably took me about 8 to 10 hours total, but that's partly because this is only my second quadcopter build. Someone that's built a lot of quadcopters shouldn't have a problem building this. And I wouldn't hesitate to buy this once you know how to fly. Don't be intimidated by building it yourself. And another thing I would recommend is to not buy a ready to fly quad, like say a Phantom or an Inspire or something like that, because I feel like that's almost just setting yourself up for failure, because a lot of people that buy those have never flown anything else and rely heavily on the computer and have no experience on how to fix it if you break it. So it's far better to know how to fix and fly your stuff than to just get up in the air right away. The experience is really helpful learning to build these things, and once you know how to build them, you can fix them really easily, because you know where everything is, you know how it connects. I would just do your research before building if this is your first one. And that's about it. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you like this video.